I still remember the first time I met my in-laws. It was a warm afternoon, the kind where the sun casts a golden hue over everything, making even the most mundane seem magical. I had dressed modestly, a simple kurta and jeans, not wanting to appear ostentatious. My wife, Aisha, had always emphasized her family's simplicity and humility. But as I stepped into their spacious home in Clifton, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, I felt a pang of unease. Her father, Mr. Ahmed, greeted me with a firm handshake, his eyes scanning me from head to toe. Her mother, Mrs. Ahmed, offered a polite smile, but there was a coldness in her gaze. They led me to the drawing room, where an array of snacks awaited. As we sat, the conversation flowed, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of being evaluated. "So, what do you do?" Mr. Ahmed inquired, sipping his tea. "I run a small tech startup," I replied, keeping it brief. "Ah, startups. Risky business," he remarked, exchanging a glance with his wife. "Script Magazine plus for the Script Lab plus for Wikipedia plus for." I smiled, choosing not to delve deeper. Over the years, I had learned the value of discretion. My company had grown steadily, but I preferred to keep my successes private. As the evening progressed, subtle comments began to surface. Mrs. Ahmed mentioned how Aisha had always been accustomed to a certain lifestyle. Mr. Ahmed spoke of the importance of financial stability in marriage. Each remark, though veiled in politeness, felt like a jab. After dinner, as I prepared to leave, Aisha walked me to the door. "I'm sorry about tonight," she whispered. "It's okay," I assured her, forcing a smile. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. Was I truly accepted or merely tolerated? Over the next few months, I noticed patterns. Invitations to family gatherings were sparse. When we did attend, conversations often revolved around wealth, status, and achievements. I remained silent, observing, absorbing. One evening, during a family dinner, Mr. Ahmed spoke of a friend's son who had secured a high-paying job abroad. "Now that's a real success story," he said, looking directly at me. I nodded, maintaining my composure. But inside, a storm brewed. A week later, Aisha and I visited her parents. As we entered, I overheard Mrs. Ahmed on the phone. Yes, Aisha could have done better.
"But she insisted," she said.
I paused, heart pounding. The words stung, confirming my fears. That night, I lay awake, memories replaying in my mind. The subtle insults, the dismissive glances, the condescension. I realized I had been too passive, too accommodating. It was time to change. It started with a wedding invitation. Aisha's cousin was getting married, and the event was set to be a grand, 3-day affair in Islamabad. Lavish venues, designer clothes, choreographed dances, the whole spectacle. We were both invited, but I noticed Aisha hesitating when she brought it up. "I think you should sit this one out," she said one evening as we sat down for dinner. Her voice was soft, almost rehearsed. I looked up.
"Why?"
She played with her fork. "It's just they're making it kind of formal. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." That stung more than I let on. Uncomfortable how? I've been to formal events before. She hesitated. "You know how they are, they can be judgmental." "And you think they'll judge me?" I asked, keeping my tone even.
"No."
"No, it's not that," she rushed to say. I want to avoid drama. That's all." I nodded slowly, but the unease was back, stronger than ever. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just about a wedding. The next day, I drove Aisha to her parents' house. As she stepped inside, I stayed in the car, pretending to check emails on my phone. The front door didn't close completely, and their voices drifted out. "I told him not to come," Aisha was saying. "You know how they'll react," Mrs. Ahmed responded. "Good. We don't want embarrassment in front of the Shafiqs. Let them think she married someone respectable." I stopped breathing for a second. Embarrassment? Is that what I was to them? My chest tightened, but I said nothing. I dropped Aisha off, smiled like always, and drove away. From that point forward, everything they did felt different, loaded with unspoken meaning. I remembered the gifts they gave me, impersonal, generic, as if fulfilling a duty. I remembered the seating arrangements at family events, always isolating me to the edge of the room. I recalled how Mr. Ahmed introduced me. This is Aisha's husband. He works in computers or something. In computers or something. Each memory replayed with new clarity, the dots connecting into a picture I didn't want to see before. I started paying closer attention. I noticed how they avoided asking me about work, how they changed the subject when I brought up technology or business, how they showed genuine interest in every other son-in-law's career except mine. Once, at a dinner, Aisha's uncle asked what I did exactly. I run a cybersecurity company, I said. Before I could continue, Mr. Ahmed cut in. Oh, those online things come and go so quickly. Remember how Orkut vanished? Facebook too, one day. That's not real work. Laughter followed. I smiled with them, but inside, something cracked. Later that night, I opened my laptop and stared at the dashboard of my company's admin panel. The numbers were clear. We had crossed 7 figures in revenue that month. Our newest contract, with a European bank, had just cleared, but none of that mattered to them.
Because they didn't care to ask.
They had already made up their minds about who I was. A week later, Aisha brought up the idea of us buying a bigger apartment. Just something more central, she said. It'll make it easier to host. I nodded. We can look into it. She added quickly, but we'll need help from my parents. Maybe a small loan. I blinked. A loan? Why would we need a loan? She looked confused. Well, can we afford it without help? The silence that followed was thick. Do you think we can't? I asked. She hesitated. You don't really talk about money. And your car, it's not. I held up a hand. Stop. That was the moment. Right there. Even she had begun to believe their version of me. I stood up and left the room, walked to the balcony, and looked out at the city lights. My mind raced with emotions, anger, hurt, betrayal. I had chosen to live modestly. I had no interest in flashy cars or brand names. I'd grown up middle class and never saw wealth as a measure of worth. But now, that very humility had become the noose they were tightening around my neck. Was it all a performance? Every smile, every hug, every beta from her parents, was it just civility masking contempt? And the most painful question, had Aisha always thought this too? I didn't confront her that night. I needed clarity first. Evidence. I needed to be sure this wasn't just in my head. So I started watching more closely. One night, I came home early from a meeting. Aisha was on the phone, her voice hushed. He's smart, but he's not exactly ambitious, she was saying. My parents are right. Maybe I did settle. I froze. Those words, the casual cruelty in them, burned into my mind. Settle. As if I were a compromise. A backup plan. She ended the call before I could move. I stayed hidden in the hallway, heart pounding. The walls around me felt smaller after that night. That was when I made the decision. No more silence. No more humility mistaken for lack. No more letting them write my story. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to show them. Show them everything. It began with a single envelope. Not a flashy gesture. Not a confrontation. Just a white, plain envelope. Thicker than usual, with a custom wax seal embossed with my company's logo. I handed it to Mr. Ahmed during their weekly family brunch. No expression on my face. No emotion. Just, I thought you might want to see this. He gave me a quizzical look, then peeled it open slowly, his fingers almost suspicious of what he might find. Inside was a collection of printed documents, Forbes Asia's Top 30 Under 30 feature, my photo right there on page 7. A copy of the recent contract I had signed with a European multinational bank worth over $12 million annually. A valuation certificate from a Dubai-based financial auditor showing that my company had been appraised at $92 million US. And, for good measure, an invitation to a technology conference in Singapore, where I'd been selected as a keynote speaker. Mr. Ahmed didn't say a word, but I saw it. The flicker of disbelief in his eyes. The tightening of his jaw. His pride, no, his illusion of superiority, had taken a hit, and the tremor showed. Aisha's mother leaned over, peering into the pages. "Is that you in this magazine?" she asked, her voice faint. I nodded once. "Beta, this looks very impressive," she said, her tone cautious, as if testing the words. "Thank you," I replied simply. "I just thought you all deserved to know what I actually do." Since there's been some confusion. That hit its mark. Aisha looked at me, her face paling. She opened her mouth to speak, but I continued, calm and clear. For years, I kept things low-key. I didn't feel the need to prove myself with titles, with cars, with branded suits. I valued peace over pride. But lately, I realized silence can sometimes be mistaken for weakness. A few cousins sat stunned, unsure whether to sip their chai or apologize. I started this company 7 years ago, working from a shared office space with borrowed laptops. Today, we protect the data of major banks, government institutions, and hospitals across 3 continents. I employ 150 full-time engineers across 2 countries. And yet, I looked around the table. Somehow, I became the one people whispered about. A murmur went through the room. But I wasn't finished. I've heard the comments, the subtle digs, the forced smiles. Even my own wife believed I couldn't afford a decent apartment without a loan from her parents. Aisha's head dropped, her cheeks burning crimson. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Let me make something clear. I didn't marry into this family for validation or status. I thought I was marrying a partner, someone who saw me for who I truly was, not who I appeared to be. Mr. Ahmed finally found his voice. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" I smiled. Would it have mattered? He flinched. "You already decided who I was long ago. You saw my simplicity and called it inadequacy. You heard the word tech and assumed I was broke. You never asked. You just labeled me." I could see it, shame creeping in like an unwelcome guest. For the first time, I had control of the room, not because I demanded it, but because truth had a way of shifting gravity. Then I turned to Aisha. My voice softer now, but no less resolute. "Do you know why I drive the same car I did 5 years ago? Because I don't need a car to feel successful. I'd rather invest in building something that lasts. But when even you start believing I'm not enough, that's when I know something's broken." Her eyes welled up. "I never meant." "You didn't have to," I interrupted gently. "Your silence said enough." A younger cousin whispered to another, "He's literally in Forbes," and they called him average. I let out a breath. This isn't about revenge. I don't want apologies or applause. I just want the respect I earned, not through titles or family connections, but through years of hard work. Mr. Ahmed stood slowly, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "You've made your point, son." I folded the documents back into the envelope and placed it on the table. I didn't come here to make a point. I came to reclaim my story. And with that, I walked out of the room. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just free. That evening, Aisha tried to talk to me.
"I didn't know," she said.
I just listened to them. I didn't question it. "I thought your silence meant you were okay with things." "I was okay with being humble," I replied. "But not invisible. There's a difference." She sat beside me, tears in her eyes. "I want to make this right."
"I hope so," I said.
"But you'll have to decide if you're strong enough to see me for who I truly am, without filters, without your parents' opinions. Just me." She reached out for my hand, hesitant, unsure. I let her hold it. But in my mind, I knew this wasn't just about respect anymore. This was about remembering who I was before they tried to reduce me to nothing. It was about the reckoning that was now finally underway. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind, a strange blend of silence and sudden validation. I could feel the shift. It was in the way people looked at me, no longer with veiled amusement or quiet judgment, but with a cautious kind of curiosity, as if they were still trying to reconcile the version of me they had created with the one I had revealed. I didn't need to say more. I had said enough. But life, of course, had more to say. The first turning point came when I was invited to speak at that Singapore conference. It was a packed hall, industry leaders, global investors, tech enthusiasts. I stepped onto that stage in a modest black suit, No designer label stitched on the sleeve, and told my story. Not the fancy, curated one. The real one. The boy from Karachi who taught himself coding from a library computer. Who got laughed at for pitching cybersecurity ideas in broken English. Who stayed up for nights with 3G hotspot connections just to build a working prototype while the city slept. The crowd gave me a standing ovation. Later, a venture capital firm from Berlin approached me for a minority stake in my company. $14 million on the table, just for a seat. I declined.
Why?
Because I had tasted something better than money, self-worth on my own terms. Back home, the news started to spread. A Pakistani entrepreneur making waves in the cybersecurity world. Articles were written. Podcasts called. Even my old university requested I return as a guest lecturer. And that's when Mr. Ahmed called me. Not Aisha, not her mother, him. The same man who once suggested I try government exams because business isn't for everyone. He wanted to meet. Alone. We sat across from each other at a quiet cafe, the air stiff with unspoken things.
He didn't order anything.
Just stared at the table for a long moment before speaking. I misjudged you, he said finally. I nodded, but said nothing. I thought you were beneath Aisha. I was wrong. You've built something remarkable. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I didn't need you to be wrong, I said calmly. I needed you to be fair. He exhaled slowly. And what now? I don't know, I replied honestly. That depends on how your family moves forward. I'm not looking for approval. Just honesty. He nodded, slower this time. You have it. A pause. I want to support your work, he added, eyes lifting to mine. Perhaps invest if you'd allow. I almost laughed, but I didn't. I appreciate the offer, I said gently. But I prefer my investors like I prefer my team, those who believed in me before the headlines. He flinched, but he understood. It wasn't just about capital. It was about character. Meanwhile, things with Aisha were evolving. She had started asking real questions, not about my money but about my mission. About what fueled me. What scared me. She began attending my team meetings, taking notes, reading articles I'd written, asking if she could help. Not as my wife, but as someone genuinely interested. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a start. One evening, as we watched the sun dip over the Karachi skyline, she turned to me and said something I'll never forget. I married a man I thought I understood. But now I realize I didn't even know the half of your strength. I looked at her, unsure whether to feel relief or resentment. I didn't need you to know my strength, I replied. I needed you not to question it when I was quiet about it. She nodded, tears forming again. I'm learning. I sighed, not out of frustration, but something deeper. Then let's rebuild from truth, not assumption. From that moment, things began to heal. Slowly, yes, but meaningfully. My family, who had once been skeptical themselves, now wore their pride like a badge. My younger cousins began reaching out for mentorship. One even asked if I could help him learn to code. And as for Aisha's extended family, well, they didn't have much to say these days. Some still avoided eye contact. Others suddenly became warm, curious, overly interested. I remained polite, but distant. Respectful, but not eager. I had learned where I stood. And I had no desire to return to a place where my worth had to be proven over and over again. The real shift, however, happened inside me. There was a freedom in being seen clearly, not through the lens of wealth, but through the mirror of purpose. For years, I had carried this quiet ache of being underestimated, misjudged, silently insulted. Now, that ache had transformed into power, not arrogance, just clarity. Because when you've spent enough time being looked down upon, there comes a day when you simply look up and realize you were never beneath them. They were just too high on their own illusions to see you standing tall. I didn't need to change who I was. I just needed to stop shrinking to fit their version of me. The turning point wasn't the money. It wasn't the awards. It wasn't the headlines. It was the moment I reclaimed my narrative. The moment I walked into a room full of people who once doubted me and didn't flinch. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I had nothing left to prove, and everything left to live. 6 months had passed since that fateful dinner party, the one where their smirks turned to silence, and my truth was finally seen. But what followed wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better. Real growth. A kind of peace I hadn't known before. Aisha and I began going to couples therapy, not because we were falling apart, but because we wanted to understand each other beyond the noise. She admitted she had absorbed her family's values too deeply, that their obsession with class and status had clouded her vision, that she saw me through their lens for too long, instead of through her own heart. And I admitted something too, that I had been carrying bitterness, that I had built walls so high, even love couldn't climb them sometimes, that I had equated her silence with betrayal. We cried. We forgave. We rebuilt. I didn't expect things to be easy, but I expected them to be real. And for the first time, they were. We started a foundation together, using part of the company's profits to provide free cybersecurity education to underprivileged youth in Pakistan. Aisha ran the outreach program, while I structured the curriculum. We visited local schools, held workshops, and launched an annual scholarship named after my mother, the woman who once hid coins in flour tins to pay for my books. It wasn't charity. It was full circle. And every time I saw a young kid light up after writing their first line of code, I remembered the version of me who had once waited outside a closed library, hungry for knowledge. That boy had finally found his purpose. As the foundation grew, so did our bond. We took late-night walks again, cooked dinner together without talking about work, laughed over burnt toast, held hands in silence, knowing that sometimes love is quiet, but no less powerful. And then came the day we visited her parents again, not for confrontation, but closure. They were more polite this time. Mr. Ahmed looked older, wearier. He asked about the foundation, even congratulated me on a recent award. Aisha's mother offered chai. We sat around the same table where I had once been humiliated, but now, the air was different. Respect filled the space where judgment once lived. After tea, as we prepared to leave, Mr. Ahmed walked me to the gate. I still have much to learn, he said, eyes not quite meeting mine. So do I replied. And that was enough. Back at home, I received a call from a major university in Islamabad. They wanted me to speak at their graduation ceremony. As I stood before hundreds of students in caps and gowns, I realized I wasn't nervous. I was grateful. I spoke to them not just as an entrepreneur, but as a survivor of low expectations. As someone who had once been overlooked, underestimated, and almost erased. I used to think proving others wrong was the goal, I said to them. But the real victory is proving yourself right, quietly, consistently, and without apology. The auditorium erupted in applause. Later, a young woman approached me, hijab neatly pinned, notebook in hand. "Sir," she said shyly, "your story made me believe in mine." I smiled. Then I've done my job. That evening, Aisha and I sat on our rooftop, watching the stars. "You're different now," she said softly. "No," I replied, looking up. "I'm just no longer hiding." She leaned her head on my shoulder. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to, because sometimes the loudest thing in the world is the silence that follows healing. Not every wound had vanished, but every one of them had meaning now. Every scar had a story, and every judgment I once endured was now a stepping stone to the man I had become. A man no longer obsessed with revenge, but driven by purpose. A man who didn't need validation to feel valuable. A man who understood that some storms don't come to break you, but to clear the path. And mine had done exactly that. 2 years later, I was standing inside a private gallery in Lahore, surrounded by guests in formal suits and designer dresses, the room alive with soft jazz and the clink of champagne glasses. But the center of attention wasn't me. Not this time. It was Aisha. She was unveiling her first curated exhibition on modern Pakistani changemakers. A visual tribute to individuals across the country who had transformed their pain into power. The final piece in the collection was a digital portrait of me, rendered in layered strokes of binary code, interlaced with Urdu calligraphy that spelled out resilience, dignity, and truth. Below it, a plaque read, "From outsider to architect of hope, this man didn't just build firewalls, he broke them." As the crowd clapped and cameras flashed, I stood frozen for a moment, not out of pride, but disbelief. How far we had come. That night, as the gallery lights dimmed and the last guests filtered out, Aisha and I remained behind. She turned to me with that familiar mischievous spark in her eyes. "I have something for you," she said. From her bag, she pulled out a thick envelope. I raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a document, neatly typed, signed, and sealed. It was an offer from her family. Not just an apology letter, but a formal business proposal. They wanted to invest in our foundation, not as a PR move, but with genuine intention. "They've been watching everything quietly," she said. "I think they're starting to understand." I stared at the paper, emotions colliding like waves in a storm. A year ago, I might have laughed bitterly and torn it in half.
But now?
Now I understood something deeper. That sometimes, the best revenge isn't a loud declaration or a dramatic rejection. It's being so grounded in your truth that you no longer need revenge at all. So I accepted. Not because I needed their money, but because I wanted to show the world, especially the young dreamers watching, that bridges can be rebuilt, even after they've burned. Months later, at our annual tech summit, Mr. Ahmed took the stage beside me. He spoke publicly for the first time about his initial judgments, the classist values he had clung to, and the humility he had found in watching me rise. "I once mistook wealth for worth," he admitted. "But this man taught me that character is the only currency that never loses value." The room went silent. Somewhere in the back, I saw my father's old friend wiping his eyes. A few rows down, Aisha smiled, proud and radiant. It was a moment that could never have existed had I retaliated in anger, had I let my pain fester into vengeance. Instead, I had chosen evolution. That night, as we returned home, I climbed up to the same rooftop that had witnessed so many of my silent nights. The wind was soft. The city was alive below. And then I saw something. On the table sat a small wooden box. I hadn't noticed it before. I opened it slowly. Inside was my mother's old copper bangle, wrapped in a velvet cloth. Aisha had found it at my old childhood home when we went back to visit months earlier. Tucked underneath was a note in her handwriting. "This is who you've always been." Even when they didn't see it, I did. My chest tightened. I held the bangle in my hands, the same one my mother wore as she worked long hours sewing clothes to fund my education. She never lived to see what I became. But somehow, in that moment, I felt her presence. I could almost hear her voice. "Don't ever let them tell you what you're worth, Beta. You were born valuable." Tears welled in my eyes, not of sadness, but of release. Because I finally understood. My fortune wasn't just the wealth I had built. It was the man I had become. It was the respect I had earned. It was the voice I now used, not to shout in anger, but to inspire in love. And that was the final twist. They thought I was broke. But I was always rich. Rich in vision. Rich in courage. Rich in the fire that refused to die, even when surrounded by smoke. As I stood there, bangle in hand, stars above, city below, I whispered to the wind. They tried to measure me by their scale, but I was never on their scale. I was building my own, and I had already won.